Welcome to Studio 12 from the School of Performing and Screen Arts at Unitec in Auckland. Hi, I'm Rob Neale. Studio 12 is a series of discussion programs in which we identify an issue and then we look for a way forward. And we do that with the help and guidance of a panel of expert commentators. Today's topic is entrepreneurship, New Zealand's big opportunity. But before we meet today's panel, we'd like to hear first from two students, and they're from Unitec's Master of Business Innovation and Entrepreneurship course. So here's their take on entrepreneurship, the profile.
The entrepreneur is generally a business person.
Someone who's creating wealth.
They tend to be people who are looking and capable of finding opportunities.
It's about empathy, it's about getting on with people.
Then there's the innovator. The innovator is the person who spends considerable time coming up with an idea. They may actually then need an entrepreneur who can do something with it.
It seems to me that a lot of the characteristics of an entrepreneur come from the home or the environment that the person is brought up in.
There are certain characteristics that entrepreneurs seem to have, one of which is a characteristic of extroversion or confidence.
But I think there's a good proportion of entrepreneurs come from backgrounds that provide opportunities, that provide a certain set of circumstances that are useful to them later.
I'd say that the environment creates the entrepreneur more than something that's born into them.
So those are two views on entrepreneurship and the profile, but how does that stack up with the views of our panellists? Well, I'd like to introduce you to our first panellist, that's Maxine Simmons. Now, Maxine is co-founder of biotech company ICPbio. Maxine, what's your view of the essential characteristics of an entrepreneur?
An entrepreneur is someone who is capable of grasping an idea and taking it forward, getting other people enthusiastic about it, making sure they've got the resources that are needed to just make it all happen.
And you thought you and still think you are an entrepreneur? That's you?
I think I probably still have, yes, a spark of that enthusiasm and, just desire to make things happen, get on there and achieve things.
Now, if I can introduce our second guest, and our second guest today is Mark Edwards. Mark is the director of a venture capital company, Number 8 Ventures. Mark, what's your take on what it is to be an entrepreneur? They obviously come knocking at your door. What do they look like? What do they seem like to you?
Well, they come in all different shapes and sizes, there's no doubt about that. But the key aspect we look for is passion. And we look for people who have a fire in the belly to get something done. Obviously, as Maxine just said, it's important that they are able to enroll other people around them and build a team. Ultimately, they're going to build a company, so they've got to have good interpersonal skills as well.
Thank you. Also on the panel today is Rod Oram. Now, Rod, you may know more as a journalist, but he is also the Adjunct Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at Unitec. So, Rod, what's your take? What do you think an entrepreneur is? Define it.
An entrepreneur is a person who has the talent to spot an opportunity and the strong desire to drive it forward.
Okay, completing our panel, we're very pleased to welcome to New Zealand Professor John Thompson. Professor Thompson is the Professor of Entrepreneurship at the University of Huddersfield in the UK. Professor, welcome. What's your take? What do you see as entrepreneurship?
Well, I agree with the other views that it's a way of behaving, and it's a way of behaving that's built around opportunity, spotting them, seizing them, driving them forward. But I also think we shouldn't think entrepreneurs only appear in the world of business. They're in every walk of life. And secondly, there's a habitual serial element to it. It's something people do recurringly, time and again, which is why so many people are still starting new ventures and new initiatives off when they've made enough money to retire and sit back. They still keep going. But
not everyone is sort of a born entrepreneur, are they? I mean, not everyone is going to be an entrepreneur.
I think the people who are going to be outstandingly successful as an entrepreneur, as in every walk of life, are born with certain characteristics. Some of them are talents, some of them concern temperament. Only if particular characteristics in place can you achieve excellence. Without those characteristics, you can still do okay at something, you can still be average, but it will always be harder work and you will never go that final mile.
So there are some people who are born and some people who are assisted once they have those characteristics.
I think everybody can be assisted. Even the most outstanding musicians and athletes find the right people to coach them. They know what sort of help they require and they go for it. They appreciate just where the gaps are. But of course, as in every other case, there is the wrong sort of training, there is the wrong sort of support, which actually doesn't help people, and in fact can be a turn-off.
Okay, we're going to expand on that in a moment, but first of all I think we need to get some sort of feel as to how important, how significant this is to New Zealand. We've called it a time of opportunity. Rod, if I could start with you, why would you be optimistic now about New Zealand and this being an opportunity? Why do you think it is?
I see three main dynamics at work here in the world. The first is that, call it globalization or interdependence, but there is an extraordinary well-developed system for getting ideas and products and services out around the world. Secondly, New Zealand has what many people want around the world, and they'll either come as tourists or they'll buy our goods and our services. But the third thing is that New Zealand has been preparing itself over the last 20 years by creating an economy here which works quite well for entrepreneurs. It's a very efficient economy and you can actually get things done quite easily here. Put the three together and this is an unparalleled opportunity for New Zealanders with ideas to take those ideas out to the world and earn a decent living from it.
Even though we're at the edge of the earth, that doesn't matter?
Being at the edge, not on the edge, but being at the edge is a great place to be because it's at the edge where things happen. Change doesn't happen at the centre. And I think it's very important in New Zealand that we have some perspective on the rest of the world. And although there are some disadvantages, like a 12-hour flight to Los Angeles, you need to see that in a different perspective. I always say to American visitors, don't worry, we're only 4 movies away from LA, and if you're lucky, you might sleep through the first couple. So we can turn those apparent disadvantages to our advantage here in New Zealand.
Well, let me throw that open to the rest of you. Do you think this is a time of opportunity? Mark, would you see this as a time of great opportunity, or do you think that there's some things we need to be wary of here?
Well, I see a tremendous amount of early stage things going on here. There's a lot of technology development that occurs here. The caveats occur in how do we create companies out of that, and that's where I think currently more work needs to be done, and more exposure needs to be given to taking the actual raw technology, the innovativeness that occurs, whether that's individuals or inside small companies or in educational institutions, but actually taking and making something out of that. And that's where I feel the real opportunity lies right now.
Maxine, you're someone who has helped take a company from this small and distant shore overseas. Did you find it an advantage or a disadvantage to be in New Zealand to do that?
Well, we chose to stick to New Zealand's really great opportunities here. We've got good agricultural science base and we're well recognised internationally for that. So it was relatively simple for us to capitalise on that as a business.
So it didn't matter that you were a long way away?
No, and I agree with Rod. It was actually an advantage in some regards because we were doing things differently here and we could communicate that to them, and they really just appreciated that it was good science that we were basing everything on, and it was just different and new. And
so, John, do you agree? Is this a time of great opportunity? I mean, you come in and out of New Zealand, you probably get snapshots. Do you think that this is a time for great opportunity for entrepreneurs here?
I think it certainly is. I think as you travel around the world, the willingness to embrace the notion of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs as people does vary. In some countries, in some cultures, there's more hostility than in others, but here it's definitely welcoming. And I think that's good because clearly, in my mind, entrepreneurs are the people who make a difference. They're the people who drive the world forward. And certainly at the moment, we need people who can champion change.
Okay, so do we all accept that entrepreneurship is good? We actually need them, we need to encourage them. Is there any downside at all? Anyone want to put that hand up and say, unbridled entrepreneurship has got some fishhooks, or is it all good?
Oh, I'd come straight in there and say it's not all good. There's a downside to it, and simply because the very characteristics that make someone a successful entrepreneur in business or elsewhere are actually the sort of characteristics that make people successful in other walks of life. For example, the master criminal is in many respects an entrepreneur, and therefore the more we reduce the regulations, the more we open up the opportunity for people to abuse them. So we do have to be a little bit careful.
Well, I'd like to draw the distinction between activity and results, and entrepreneurship in a way is an activity. It's a way of being, it's a way of doing things. one of the things that I look for in business are results, and typically successful entrepreneurs have surrounded themselves with other people. So having a country full of entrepreneurs is not necessarily a great thing. That's like having a cricket team with only fast bowlers. You need some other players on the team. So sometimes it is important to look at what does the entrepreneur need to flesh out the actual opportunity so that they can go and create something, be part of the creative process, not the entire creative process themselves.
Would you accept, though, that probably the need or the options for entrepreneurs are greater now than they've ever been, if only because of the pace of change in the world, and these are people who need to and accommodate change? That the pace of change is so great that we need them more now than ever.
Well, I think we have them. We've always had them. I think that they are given more exposure than perhaps they were some decades ago. It's a good thing to be an entrepreneur now. Even when I was coming out of secondary school, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to go into business, whereas now I believe it is a good thing to go into business. So it is a recognised career path. But I think there needs to be a mix between entrepreneurs and the supporting cast. You know, you need the secondary players, you need supporting players to come in around them to help them be effective. Otherwise, on their own, they're not always going to be effective.
Maxine, if I could throw that to you, is it okay to be an entrepreneur in New Zealand? I would have thought that there are times where it has been almost a stigma to put your hand up and say that you're an entrepreneur. There was something slightly dodgy, I'm afraid, about you.
Yeah, I think that's changed, and I think it's significantly changed in the last 6 years here in New Zealand.
But it was a case at one stage?
Yeah, I think the tall poppy thing, you know, I mean, that's always been suggested to be a problem in New Zealand, and I think it has been, but I think that's changed.
Rob, what's your take on it?
I think it has changed. I've now been in the country 6 years and have seen a big change. I think one of the fundamental aspects there is that the whole change in the structure of the economy away from something highly organised with import tariffs and licenses and the rest to something which is much more fluid and flexible. And increasingly, real growth is coming from small, creative, innovative organisations rather than large. And what I find very exciting about that is that I know quite a few companies around which actually trade in more foreign currencies, in more markets than they have employees. That's one measure of how possible it is to be a truly international entrepreneur. And I'll always keep coming back to stressing that international dimension, because I think that's terribly important in New Zealand. But that's what's possible these days.
So it's cool to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I'd add just one caution, though, to the other ones that have been put on the table, is that an economy cannot survive on entrepreneurism alone. At the end of the day, we actually do need some quite large organisations. Now, you want a high degree of creativity within a large organisation, but a large organisation is necessary, for example, to run a major international airline or perhaps the government. But within that, you want people who have the desire, and they're working in a corporate culture which allows them to bring real creativity to what they do, so they can make that very large organisation one that's keen to change and always looking to do things better. But as I say, we also need to realise that we need large organisations as well as this amazing myriad entrepreneurs.
Okay, if we accept then that entrepreneurship now is a good thing, we need more of them, we need to encourage them, and we accept that this is a time of opportunity, what we need to do is to look at the drivers, the things that are actually making that happen. Mark, what would you see as the major drivers of entrepreneurship now here?
Well, I think you've got both formal and informal elements of an ecosystem that need to be in place. When I say formal elements, I'm talking about the accountants and the attorneys and the other professional support organisations, and then the informal would be peer groups, people who've been successful, mentors, people like Maxine, for example, who've had success mentoring other entrepreneurs. So I think that ecosystem needs to develop. It takes time to come about. It needs to be promoted, and that's what I would like to see happening here.
So it's not just enough to have a good idea?
Not at all. That's the easy part. Having the good idea is the easy part, and I would submit there are a lot of good ideas in this country. Translating that good idea into a viable commercial enterprise is a whole nother business.
Maxine, was the original idea the easy part and the rest of it was hard?
Always.
So what did you see as the major challenges?
Major challenges are just putting all the bits together. I mean, you need just so much more than just a product or just an idea or just marketing skills. It's a big package. To actually take an idea, turn it into a product, and have people wanting to buy it from the other side of the world, there's a huge number of things involved in all of that. And any one individual doesn't have all those skills. This is the point that Mark's made. You've got to assemble all those, and that takes a lot.
Rod, from the research that you have done, I get the impression that New Zealand is seen as a good place for innovators, for people who come up with the ideas, but it's this second part of taking that a step further where we're perhaps not as good. Would that be the result of your research? Is that a fair summary?
That's absolutely the case. And the exciting thing over the last few years is that we've started to think, question, analyse much more carefully what is necessary to bring around these people. So we get much better commercialisation out of our science, we get real commercialisation out of our innovation. I think it's a journey we've only just started, because taking a very big picture view, I think that what we're trying to do here in New Zealand is unprecedented in terms of we're trying to be global players by being very small yet very international and from a long way away from major markets. Now, in my own mind, and I see it out there every day, it is possible to do that, but it's a very different form of management, entrepreneurial or otherwise, than anybody else is doing in the world. So we're actually breaking new ground here.
Can you illustrate that point? How is it different from what anyone else is doing?
I did some lectures last year up at UCLA's business school, the Anderson School, on entrepreneurship, and their definition of entrepreneurship is an individual or a group of people who after 5 years would have sales of $100 million a year and might be selling in the Western states. My definition of somebody who's entrepreneurial is that after a year and a half they're already in their second international market, and by year 5 they're a truly global company. Now, what you need to go through to develop the skills to pursue those two different views of entrepreneurship is fundamentally different. And at UCLA, they were initially immensely skeptical that A, that was entrepreneurism as they understood it, or B, that it could actually be done. But I kept plying them with examples of companies that were doing it. If we get this right, and I'm reasonably confident we'll keep learning and growing, I think we'll be making a very distinctive contribution to the sort of the canon of management literature around the world, and it'll be different than the existing canon.
John, is that the way that you see it, that we are breaking ground here, that we could export new management ideas?
I think the discussion is highlighting what's so often forgotten, and that is that there are two transformations. One's the idea into a viable business opportunity, into a product or service that can be taken to market. But the other transformation, which is more difficult, is the person with the idea into a true entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial organisation. And Mark was right, a lot of it is finding the right people to work with, because a lot of the people who start down this road are ill-equipped in themselves to be the person to take it through to the end. And without the right help, without the right support, they won't go too far down that road. And this whole idea of building the organisation is the one thing that we so often forget.
But it must be very hard if you come up with an idea to ever let go of it. I mean, Maxine,
right.
This is probably something that you've had to cope with. If you come up with the idea and you get it to fruition, it must be very hard to let go.
I think that's probably the biggest challenge, and probably is where New Zealand companies don't grow as quickly or as rapidly as they could, because you do have that conundrum. The person who originally had the idea doesn't necessarily have the skills to take it to the next step or the next step or the next step, and it's getting out at the right time, and no one can easily tell an individual when that time might be.
So if I can just come to you on that, Mark, you must see this on a daily basis where people need to come to you for capital but are reluctant to dilute their hold on the idea.
Yes, and typically what we do is we determine very early on whether the type of strong corporate governance that's required to ensure succession, that ensures that the right people are in the right roles, whether those ideas are acceptable to the entrepreneur. And that can determine very quickly whether a company is one that we can invest in or not. So we try to, right up front, find out, is the entrepreneur willing to be part of the change that has to be made, including strong outside corporate governance that has to come in. The other element that we really look for is is this company focused on the market? Are they going to be customer responsive? Versus I've got a great idea and I'm going to prosecute this idea into the market, as opposed to I'm going to listen to and understand what the market needs and be willing to modify and cut off this piece or add this piece to the product. So a very product-focused entrepreneur as opposed to a market-focused entrepreneur, that will also determine whether the company is investable from a venture capitalist viewpoint.
Okay, let me then say, all right, if we want entrepreneurs, we want to encourage them, and there are these sort of attitudinal challenges as much as anything else, let's just go around the table and say, if there were 2 or 3 things that you could recommend that we need to do, what would they be? So, John, perhaps if I can start with you, if there were 2 or 3 things that you could advise that we should do if we want to encourage entrepreneurship, now's your time to tell us.
Well, I think the first major thing to do is to realise that there's a distinction between the idea of being enterprising, and I think it's almost in a sense beholden on all of us to be as creative and enterprising in everything that we do as we can be. And the idea of the entrepreneur who can build something of value, and each of those people needs different support right from the school age onwards. And it's a willingness to almost make a selection or a distinction between the people who've got those extra qualities. Not deny anybody the opportunity to be encouraged to be enterprising, but to pre-select those people with the special talents and the right temperament and give them a sort of special help, much in line with the way that we help people with musical talent or artistic talent, or particularly the sporting academies.
So it's like having a sporting academy for entrepreneurs.
Correct.
You select them early, spot the talent,
Correct.
and then build them up.
Correct, because the most outstanding people you will usually find when they were almost no age, they were doing something enterprising and probably making money out of it as well.
And you're confident that you could pick those young talents?
I am, with a colleague, working on an indicator to try and do just that. It's not an easy thing to do, obviously, but I think we're making real progress.
Maxine, if I could come to you and say, what are the 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would like to impart that would move us forward?
I think it's education. I think we're lacking in New Zealand just an understanding of the whole process of going beyond an idea to the process of building reasonable sized companies. And it requires something very different from just someone who wants to do something. It's someone who's prepared to perhaps listen and understand what that's going to mean going forward. And if the venture capitalists and the entrepreneurs had a better understanding of what was required, to go the next step, I think that would help.
But isn't it the New Zealand way or the New Zealand attitude that maybe we don't want to go that next step, that actually a small company that we've got control over, hey, that's fine, we don't really necessarily want to build the company?
I think we only see one option, and that's pretty much the nice lifestyle batch. There's a certain level of aspiration amongst New Zealanders, I think, that we somehow need to encourage them to go the next step. And I don't think they understand what some of the other options are. We're a bit conservative, I think.
Q for the venture capitalist. What's your piece of advice, Mark?
Well, it's to gain experience. It's all about experience, and translating those great ideas into great companies is about building up that experience base. I think there's 2 ways to do it. One is to do it directly. That means entrepreneurs should fail fast, learn, build on that. And the second is to bring people in, whether that's boards of directors, advisory boards, but get that experience in vicariously. That does open up the possibilities. What are the possibilities? Because the worst thing that happens is, especially in the technology realm, is to think, well, I've got a nice little earner here, I can keep this business. Because in the technology world, if you don't lead, you'll die.
But what about this idea of failure? I mean, probably the public view is to say, well, that shouldn't involve any public funds. Why should this person be enriched personally and not put their own funds at risk and get public funding for that?
Well, typically the entrepreneurs that we work with are definitely putting their own assets at risk, and we're not talking about public funds here. We're talking about money that is being raised specifically to support these speculative ventures that have potentially high returns. So this is a commercial operation, but ultimately failure can be done can be achieved in many different ways. Obviously, failure that begats good experience is really important, and that's, I think, the thing that I see that's needed here most importantly and most quickly is we need to celebrate People who've tried things, have failed but got up, dusted themselves off and got on with it. I think a good example is Chris Jones at Adjunct right now. And Chris has failed, but he's coming back, and that's a good thing. And I'd like to see more of that happen here, because that's how you get the great experiences.
Rod, what's your last word on what we need to do?
I think we need a slightly higher level of anxiety and a little less complacency, that if we want to enjoy a reasonable standard of living here and be able to afford education and health and the rest, we have to earn a better living in the world, and we aren't going to earn it just in New Zealand. We produce 14 billion litres of milk a year. If we consume that only in New Zealand, we'd be drinking about 10 litres of milk a day each. So we need to be very international, but we need to have a real sense of how great the opportunity is there. But it's only when there is that drive and ambition will that really put the pressure on academic institutions like Unitec, on the government, on venture capitalists and the rest, to really deliver for those entrepreneurs, to make sure that they have the support they need to get this job done.
So, a need for greater anxiety, a need for greater communication and awareness, but the opportunity is there. That's our program. Thank you very much for being with Studio 12.